Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Shift Hits the Fan. I noticed that when I start the episode, I start with this burst of energy and I start thinking about my emotions and how I show up on video versus when I am talking with people. And I'm constantly thinking about the different ways that I show my emotions. And it comes in handy because in this episode, Tony and I are going to be talking about emotional intelligence. And we're not going to dive so deep into it, but at least we want to create a framework for this podcast where we get to define it and we get to just break it down a little bit so that you can understand what it really is and for you to start getting the awareness on how you can use it to your advantage. Because we're all emotional beings when we want to buy things, when we want to sell things, when we want to keep things to ourselves. It's all run on emotions. So how do we use it to our advantage? But first of all, Tony, thank you so much for joining me here. I am delighted that you are here. This is podcast like 15 or 16, and we're shooting for podcast 50. So we're getting there, Tony, one by one.
Yes, we are. Yeah. Happy to be here too, Jerry. Yeah, I'm good. Very quickly, interestingly enough, today we had a really hot day at 38 degrees centigrade. Yeah. And it's raining outside now in the evening, cooling it down a bit, right?
Nice.
So how do you keep your emotions intact during hot and cold, right?
Metaphorically and literally.
Yeah. So, but I like to really get into the definition of emotional intelligence by first, quoting Aristotle. Because before we even define emotional intelligence, we have this perception that are emotions good or bad, right? So Aristotle says this: anyone can become angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, this is not easy. So which means, of course, that, emotions are not good or bad, right? Emotions are just information on how we are responding to situations, because we respond to situations through our sensory signals, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, what we taste, what we touch. So in a nutshell, we can say that our emotions arise from our sensory perceptions, and it goes through our emotional brain and our thinking brain, basically. So when we say emotional intelligence, what we are referring to is our personal self-awareness and self-management of our emotions, our response to what we see, hear, feel, taste, and touch, and also our ability to be socially aware and also to be cognizant of our relationships and how we interact with them. Yeah. So that's really the scope of emotional intelligence, essentially. Yeah. And that's how the framework of emotional intelligence was first put forth even by Daniel Goleman. I think it was in 1994, 1995, right? Yeah. So, and today, of course, everybody talks about emotional intelligence because it's, we now realize that it is critical. It's critical in organizations. It's critical in all our relationships. And it's critical in how we build ourselves and grow ourselves, right? So just to get some context, people with high IQ, outperform those with average IQ only just 20% of the time. Not all the time.
Yeah.
And people with average IQ of course is intelligence. People with average IQ outperform those with high IQ 70% of the time. So which means that, there's some other factor that's at play here that really is making people really effective. And that's been identified as emotional intelligence, or sometimes called EQ, right?
Yeah.
Because only about 1/3 of people are actually able to accurately identify their emotions as they happen. And that's what they found out. Which means that 2/3 of people are typically controlled by their emotions and are not able or not skilled to identify them as they happen.
Well, they don't have the training to create the awareness, right? They don't have the awareness. They are on autopilot, which is fine, right? We're humans and we're not supposed to know everything. So, but if for
True.
people who are listening, this other number of people, why that is because they have not built or learned to have the awareness for this.
Right. Yeah. And we are familiar with 5 core emotions essentially, right? Happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and shame. It's described as the 5 core emotions, right? But these 5 core emotions actually describe or summarizes the 100 over different emotions we actually feel.
Yeah.
But yes, most of us cannot identify those emotions basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we know also about, how we are triggered by events. So our emotions are triggered by events, right? So for example, when you're driving in traffic and somebody suddenly cuts in front of you, what happens? Yeah, we talk about road rage out there, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And before we continue on that same note, for everyone who is listening, think about this for a minute. Let's talk about the road rage. Let's say that you are driving your car and someone just cuts you off and just takes that exit that they wanted to take. And obviously, with road rage and getting angry, you start having these negative emotions about the person. How dare this person do it? This is illegal. You start thinking about 1,000 different ways to punish this person somehow and make him seem like really bad, him or her, doesn't matter. And as you mentioned at the beginning, are emotions good or bad? Then if you have a little more information, for example, let's say that this person had a sick child, let's say who was choking and he's rushing to go to the hospital, and you know this information, would you be as angry that this person cut you off? If you're a normal human being, the answer would be no. You would be like, oh my God, I should have just get out of the way. How can I help?
Yes.
So
Yes.
the same situation happened, yet you chose 2 different ways of feeling towards the same situation. And that's where this emotional intelligence comes in, to having that awareness so that you can steer your emotions in the way that best benefit you.
Yeah. But the emotional hijacking, that's what we call, right? Your emotions hijack your thinking brain. Yeah. And the reason very simple, because we are wired for emotions. I mean, in the old days, when you go out there hunting for your food and you see a lion, that's not the time to Google and find out what should I do now, logically, right? So you're wired to just, it's tripwire. Your emotions are tripwired. We call that emotional hijacking. It is when your emotions hijack your thinking brain. And the reason is very simple, because when the sensory perception, this guy cutting in front of you, that information comes in and it goes first through your emotional brain before it reaches your thinking brain. So your emotional brain is tripwired to respond, and that's why you get a hijack. So whereas your thinking brain takes a little longer to process it, and that's why you say, okay, if I knew the guy was rushing to the hospital because of his kid, I wouldn't. But you didn't think that way. So another way of talking about emotions is that emotions is just information. It's not good or bad. Yeah. Another way that we define emotions is the feeling of the meanings you're making to your experiences. So which means that you are in charge of the meanings. So if the person cuts in front of you in traffic and you give it that meaning of, oh, he's undermined my masculinity or whatever, then of course you go into a rage, right? But if you just immediately say, okay, maybe it might be in an emergency situation, otherwise he wouldn't do that, and then you wouldn't respond the same way, right? Yeah. So that's the other way of looking at emotions. Emotions is just information. And you know what? It's information. Why? Because it's information about how that person is behaving, and how you respond is information about how you are behaving. Yeah. What was that triggered you, Jeury?
Tony, I will tell a side story here. Sometimes when road rage, sometimes when people cut you off, it is your fault. Sometimes that people cut you off and they're angry at you. I was driving on, it's a long time ago, a girlfriend home, and it was summer. We had just come from the beach. And, the top is down, everything is down. We're enjoying the summer. And all of a sudden, a guy comes from behind me and just gets next to me and starts just trying to hit my car. I'm going at the normal speed limit. I don't understand what's happening. So I'm looking at the guy like, what's happening here? I don't understand. The guy's trying to push me off the road and gets in front of me and cuts me off. And I don't understand. So I pull to the side, and the guy finally just gives up. And then I'm telling my girlfriend, I'm like, what was wrong with that guy? And that girl at the time said, well, I don't know what's wrong. All I did was I threw a banana out the window.
Oh my God.
What are you doing throwing a banana while we are driving 55 miles an hour? Are you insane? And the poor guy had just probably washed his car. And,
Yeah.
I was laughing, and I'm so sorry we're digressing, but I started laughing and I found it so funny. I'm like, this is so ridiculous. So sometimes,
because maybe the banana landed on his car. I don't know, right? Yeah. Or like you said, maybe he washed his car. Yeah. So there's always a reason why people do things. So that's why it's information, right? Information about how he responds and information how we respond, basically, right? And we now know also that emotional intelligence accounts for 58% of performance in all types of jobs. And the biggest predictor of performance in the workplace is the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. Yeah. And 90% of high performers are also having high EQ. 90% of high performers also have high EQ. Only 20% of low performers are high in EQ. Again, you can see the driver here, right? Yeah. So when we talk about, now we know emotional intelligence, we've defined it in that frame. So how do we then go towards the personal competence, right? So personal competence is about our ability to stay aware of our emotions and manage and regulate them, basically. Yeah, be in charge of it. Whereas social competence is how we are aware socially of what's happening around us, and also our relationship management, ability to understand other people's emotions, their behavior and motives in order to improve the quality of our relationships, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. And it's also important to make sure that you build that awareness, that we build that awareness of not getting hijacked when something happens. We get this stimulus, that we don't go and get hijacked and start acting based on our emotions without really understanding the scene and understanding the other person. And that's where empathy comes in. We want to just activate that judge and start judging and feeling, as you said, maybe from the ego side, without just getting empathy and like just going, wait a second, let me really analyze what's really happening here. What is being said between the lines? Am I at fault here? Right? So that we can go from a meta perspective and start analyzing, why am I feeling this way? Why is this person feeling that way? Why are we going in this direction? And this is very important, and this shows that you have high emotional intelligence, especially in a leadership role.
Yeah, so, very much the research today has confirmed emphatically that emotional intelligence is the quality that leaders need to develop and need to have very strongly to be able to be effective. Because this is research done by Daniel Goleman at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, right? And the research was actually published in 1998. Yeah. And they found that, 70% of abilities associated with leadership effectiveness are related to emotional intelligence. That's a lot, that's a lot. Although, thinking abilities is important, but it's not the sole predictor of leadership effectiveness, basically. Yeah. So we have to recognize that it is such a critical component. And really, there are 4 areas that we talk about when we talk about emotional competences, right? One is self-awareness, as we mentioned earlier. Yeah. The other one is self-management. Yeah. The third one is social awareness. So the first two, self-awareness and self-management, is about personal competence.
Correct.
And social awareness and relationship management is about social competence. Yeah. So the two have to come together into the four areas that Daniel Goleman has put out. And, I think everyone who talks about emotional intelligence almost comes from this perspective that really that's at the end of the day how we manage ourselves and our emotions and how we manage our relationship with others, essentially, that makes a difference, essentially. Yeah. And of course, there are different ways of approaching it. In our practice, sometimes, Jerry, we talked about, okay, how do we define our negative emotional habits, right? And in the field of positive intelligence, we call them saboteurs or negative thinking habits, right? Yeah. So that's one way of approaching it. So by approaching it, said, okay, let's focus on self-management and self-awareness, right? Because a lot of our thinking habits, negative thinking habits especially, are very unconscious. So we're not aware, right? So self-awareness first comes from identifying those negative thinking habits, which we call saboteurs. Of course, in emotional intelligence field, they've also got a lot of different tools to evaluate your level of emotional intelligence even. Yeah.
And I would say, Tony, that if you want to, for the people listening, if you want to do a cool exercise, that is when you think about one of those negative emotions that you feel, you also have to find out, sit down with a coffee or whatever, and ask yourself this question: what do I believe about myself, that person, the circumstance that makes me feel that way? Because when things happen in the past, we start creating these beliefs. Because one or X, Y, and Z happens, then I will get this answer. And we start thinking that X equals Y always. And that is the belief, right? It's like if you, let's say that you're applying for a job. And if you believe that you won't get it because of whatever your belief is, you're not going to give the 100% to stand out, because you're going to be with one foot in and one foot out, like, I'm not going to get it anyways. Why should I even try? Right? So we always have to think about that belief that we have, because that's always propelling your actions and your emotions.
Yep. And when you said belief, it only means one thing, right? The beliefs are related to the meanings you've given to some thoughts, right? So if we change the meaning, we change the belief. And that's really what we're talking about. Now, another way of approaching emotions is that, we in our practice of neurosemantics, we call it going to the meta level, the meta emotion. If I'm anxious about something, I can be anxious about being anxious. So it's meta anxiety. If I'm angry about something, I'm angry at myself for being angry. So it's meta anger again. So when you can go up to the higher levels of your emotions, because our primary emotion is the emotion in response to an external event. So an external event triggers our primary emotion or primary response, basically, right? Now, we will always be thinking about our responses. So if an external event triggers our emotion, the primary emotion, for example, frustration, I can always go one level higher behind and say, so what is making me frustrated? Why would I be frustrated? What if I brought calm to my frustration, right? So then I can be frustrated. There's nothing wrong with being frustrated. But then we can also bring calm and say, okay, if I'm calm, then I can activate my thinking brain and respond even more effectively. Yeah. So emotions are naturally to be felt, not to be suppressed. Yeah. So when people say emotions are bad, then they don't want to feel it. And, it's an even bigger problem. They don't express or don't allow the feeling of the emotions. It's going to happen. Yeah. So it's very important to be able to feel it.
And let's get a little controversial here, because there are some sayings out in the world that says, oh, women are more emotional than men, or men have less emotions. We have to understand that according to the research, on average, women are more emotional on the empathy side, for example, but this is the average. We have to also take into account that there are men who are more emotional than other women, so that we cannot categorize. But when they have done the study, especially from Daniel Goleman, they have shown that when people are in leadership positions, they are operating at the same level in terms of emotion, so that there's no distinguishing. And they have also done brain scans where they showed the brain scans, and they cannot tell which one is the brain scan of a man or a woman who has been a leader for more than 3 years. So that might be a little controversial, But please remember that it's not always the case. So keep that in mind. So we don't have to differentiate between the sexes or anything like that.
Yeah, I think in that context, Jerry, I think it's also, I think there's the social norms, right? Social norms say that a woman leader is not expected to behave like a man leader.
Yeah.
So when a woman leader has got the same, as you said, they have got the same qualities as the man leader, right? Based on all the research, right? In terms of emotional intelligence. But sometimes social norm says, no, that she's a lady, she should not be like that. That's a bit disadvantage for the lady, basically, right? So we need to really spark the social norms and see what's effective and what's, working for people, basically. Yeah. 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 So, so I think the important thing is that, yes, emotions are wired in our neurology, and there's a whole lot of neuroscience behind emotions now, and we can talk about it at the next session. Yeah. But emotions are normal human responses.
Yeah.
And it's okay to feel them. The question is, how long do you want to keep them, right? So when we are triggered by an event, and emotion is triggered, for example, anger is triggered, right? That event is already finished, but 1 hour later, we're still feeling the anger.
Yeah.
How
You're
is
still
that, right?
reproducing it in your mind. You're still going over it in your mind. Yeah.
Exactly. So we're replaying the event in our minds, and we are reinforcing the meaning that we have for it. And that's why we're keeping the emotion. I always tell people, like, look, when you go to see a B-rated movie and it's a crap movie, do you go and see it again? You wouldn't. But how come you've just been triggered by an event? It's a, crap event and crap emotion. Why are you replaying it in your mind? For what purpose? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So we need to make that choice, because during the point of trigger, yeah, it's normal to have it. And I say, some people say, but it triggered me. My emotion went off. I said, okay, there is, because your limbic or emotional brain is wired to be triggered. Your thinking brain takes a little longer time to respond. So the way to minimize the hijack is to count to 10. That's where it works. And that's where it came from, really. We've all been told count to 10 if you want to hold on to that response or reaction, right? And they say, no, I count to 10 is still not enough. I say, count to 20. Yeah. So you see, you're giving yourself the time to respond in a more effective way, basically. Yeah.
And let's not forget about the method, because the method is only the knowledge, but you also have to put it into practice, especially when you're not strongly hijacked. Let's say that you're at the supermarket and you have to wait a little bit longer. So it's meaningless, right? But you have to test it there. You count to 10. Okay, I would like for it to be faster, right? This emotion of being rushed. Okay, count to 10. So you have to put it into context, into small situations. That way, when something big happens, you have the mental training already so that you can recall it. Because if you just know it, but you don't use it or you don't train your brain to activate that, then it's not going to work. So we have to also take that into account. You need to build that muscle.
Yeah. So, whilst we're talking about the 4 domains of emotional competence, right? Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management, right? In future episode, we go into a bit more detail in this, right? But one of the things that comes to my mind immediately now is the practice of mindfulness, in terms of how to get on top of our emotions, right? And the research has shown that, as you spoke about, being in the line and waiting, and you got to be practicing and training your mind, right? So the research now has shown that a mindfulness practice actually rewires your neurology physically, right? So as you do that practice on a regular basis, you are rewiring your neurology to be more effective and more calm in those situations. So it's not about just, okay, for this situation. No, it's long-term. If you do it long-term, basically, that's practice. Yeah. I teach this simple mindfulness practice to my mentee students that do volunteer work. And, the thing for them is just mindfulness practice of 5 minutes every day, right? On a daily basis. Within 4 weeks, they feel more calm, they have more clarity, and they get more focus, right? So now when you have a trigger for your emotions, you can minimize the hijack. I'm not saying that the hijack will disappear completely, but now you can make a choice earlier, because in the initial situation, you didn't have the capacity to kind of interrupt that hijack, right? But now you can, because you're more calm now, you see? So when it happens, you can count to 10, yes, pause, and then you change the meaning. It's reframing, basically. Yeah.
And you have to think about that one of the main reasons why that happens is because of our ego. Our ego gets hurt, and we need the value that we deserve. And you need to understand that it's not about being right, it's about being happy. So you have to put yourself aside. It's not about being right. It's about thinking, what is it that I need in this situation to get what I want?
Mm.
If I feel that I'm not being heard, then what is it that I need in order to be heard? And why do I need to be heard? It's because this is important. This is going to benefit the company. Okay, so let me put my ego aside. What do I need to do so that I can be heard? Instead of, I'm just going to get louder. I'm just going to shout, or I'm going to escalate things so that I can be heard. That might not be the right way to do it. That might not accomplish what you really want. So you have to use that emotional intelligence so that you can think about what is the best course of action in this case, so that I can get what I want.
Right. Yeah. So, so there are key areas now that emotional intelligence making a huge difference. Yeah. And if you look at an organization, where are the areas that we really need to be careful about? Well, first one is employee engagement and retention, right?
That's right.
Today, it's so important. So Gallup, in their own research, have found that managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores. So it's so important for leaders and managers to even build up their emotional intelligence much higher than everybody else, right? Because they make the difference in the engagement score, 70%, right? So that's one area, employee engagement and retention. Another area you can talk about is effective communication and conflict resolution. Now, you need a lot of emotional intelligence in that area, right? And, managers with, if they have got the high emotional intelligence, they've got the empathy, they can have active listening and assertiveness, and they foster a culture of open communication and trust, right? Now, here, what happens when you don't have it? An example is the former CEO of Uber, Travis Kalanick. He's always been quoted as the example, unfortunately. But, he was one person who had, very poor emotional intelligence. I mean, his leadership created a toxic workplace culture and poor leadership. So there was a series of scandals and allegations of sexual harassment and discrimination. See how effective communication and conflict resolution lacking because of lack of emotion. Another area in organization would be decision-making and strategic planning, right? So leaders with high EI can at least balance logic with emotional insight. Yeah, because when you're so driven by the goal of the numbers, right, you can completely overlook the part of emotion, intelligence, and empathy. Yeah, they can at least consider impact of decisions of various stakeholders, basically. Whereas leaders with low on EI, they may make impulsive and short-sighted decisions, driven excessively by ego and emotions. Yeah.
And on that note, leaders need to understand or internalize, because they know this at some level, but they don't put it into practice. They don't really understand viscerally that your employees are not computers. They're not tables. They are running on emotions. So if you know that if you have the right setup so that they can have the right emotions, automatically studies show that they're going to contribute more. They're going to be more engaged. The fluctuation is going to be lower. So you don't have to spend so much money on recruiting, onboarding, and wasting so much time. So it has a huge ROI if you're able to stimulate the right emotions on your employees. So why not develop that emotional intelligence yourself so that you can then transmit it across the organization so that you can get a much better ROI, especially with what's happening in this economic times worldwide, right? So
Yep.
this is where you really need to activate that emotional intelligence. And of course, it's trainable. You can train this. Nobody's born with this stuff up to a certain level. You can train this.
Exactly. I think that's why we're going to talk more about the next couple of sessions, how to train that emotional intelligence. But coming back to this decision making and strategic planning, the example I can talk about here is the Lehman Brothers in 2008 financial crisis. Yeah, because they were overconfident and they lacked emotional regulation, contributed to the risky decision making, and then that's how the company collapsed basically at the end of the day. Yeah. So we talked about employee engagement and retention. We talked about effective communication, conflict resolution. We talked about decision making. Now, finally, we talk about organizational culture and performance, right? So if you look at an organization, the culture, I mean, recently I was invited by a client to come in and set up the values for the organization because they want to have a values-based culture, basically. So leaders with high EI or emotional intelligence, they can cultivate a positive work environment characterized by trust, collaboration, and innovation. Yeah. And if leaders lacking that EI, they can contribute to toxic or dysfunctional culture marked by fear, micromanagement, and low morale, right? And here, the example is Enron. Enron had a culture of arrogance, deceit, and unethical behavior among top executives. And it led to company's bankruptcy and loss of thousands of jobs. So you can see that, emotional intelligence, highly critical, highly crucial to any organization, especially at the leadership level. Yeah. And for them to develop that self-awareness, self-management, social
There it is.
awareness, and relationship management.
There it
Very
is.
key.
It's
Very
about
key. Yeah.
developing. It's about developing those core features within yourself so that you can notice it before it's too late. So Tony, in the next
Yeah.
episode, we're going to be discussing this even deeper. If you guys have any questions, for those of you who are listening, or you want to know more about the topic, you can send in your questions or put it in the comments down below. This video is going
Yeah.
to be here on LinkedIn, or it's going to be also here on YouTube. We're going to put it in different places. So if you have any questions, you can just put it down there and we're going to answer it in the other episode. We also have other episodes, just so that you know, where we talk about emotional intelligence, where we talk about corporate culture. So check them out. And yeah, hope you guys have a really beautiful day. And we'll see you on the next episode where we will dive deeper into emotional intelligence for you guys.
Yep. Okay. Good. Thanks. Great one.
Have a good one, and talk to you guys in the next one.
Yep. See you.
All right.
See you next one. Bye.